100%. Now, Jay, you made a great video about. Let's dive a little bit into Star Wars, a little Kenobi. You made a great video about whether or not you were worried about Kenobi.
Oh yeah.
If you kind of like express your thoughts right now in regards to Kenobi. What are your concerns? What like going forward into this? We're only a few weeks out now from the show premiering. Where are you at with this show?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, every time I see a Kenobi trailer, I get super excited about it, right? Yeah. Because I'm, and I will say that if you were to categorize me, and this is one of the problems that I think that Disney has on their hands, and it's a really challenging problem to overcome. I will say that too, is that you literally have 3 different generations of fandom. Right. You've got the original trilogy fans. They want Star Wars to be one thing. You've got the prequel trilogy fans. They want Star Wars to be another thing. And then now you even have the sequel trilogy fans, and they want Star Wars to be a completely different thing. So it's challenging because I'm an original. I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in the early 80s. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up with Star Wars, right? Like this is my jam. And it's hard because I love seeing Kenobi on screen, but I'm the thing that worries me about where Disney is at, especially with its Lucasfilm properties, is that we can't seem to break away from this Skywalker era. Yeah. We got to keep. I mean, even Mandalorian is my favorite Star Wars of all time, by the way. So they appeased an original trilogy Star Wars fan with the best thing I've ever seen in Star Wars was Mandalorian. But even at the end of season 2, they couldn't help but bring in some Skywalker. They had to just bring in some. And I think that like I would just like to see Disney or Lucasfilm specifically realize that they have the IP itself is so powerful that they can introduce new characters into that IP in completely different eras that don't touch other aspects of the universe that we've already seen thus far. And they can, I mean, even Game of Thrones, right? Even Game of Thrones is basically saying like the new show that's going to come out doesn't have any of the same. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 characters that are similar, but it's pretty much a different era of Game of Thrones that we're going to deal with this new show. Yeah. And they're doing that on their 2nd series. So I always wish that Disney would just kind of break out of that and say, we want to just take Star Wars in this direction. We're not really trying to appease. Get the thinking out of your head that I need to appease sequel trilogy, prequel trilogy, or original trilogy, and just say we're wiping the slate clean. It's actually this now. That's kind of what I hope. And so when I see this, and when I see that you are tugging at my heartstrings a little bit because Kenobi's got his binoculars and he's looking down and there's Luke Skywalker. It's like you couldn't even refrain from using Luke Skywalker in the trailer. Like, of course you're going to get me to watch it, but at the same time, like, I don't want to see Luke in every single property that you do from here to eternity. Like, that's just going to get old, you know? So that's kind of my take.
No, 100%. You don't want to keep going back to that well and kind of overdoing it. And even I would even say the same goes for Darth Vader. You don't want to keep going back to that character over and over. As much as we all love Vader, you can play that out pretty fast, you know? Yes. It's a risk. Look, I understand, like from a business perspective, I understand Lucasfilm. Oh, if we have Kenobi and Hayden Christensen and they're back together, that's big money, right? And that's good. Okay, great. From a business perspective, that works. But it's also a huge risk because once you start incorporating these legacy characters, we've seen it with the sequel trilogy. A lot of fans were upset with how they handled the legacy characters in the sequel trilogy. Once you start incorporating these legacy characters like Kenobi and Vader and Luke, Disney really opens themselves up to drama. Because people have like this stuff is like wrapped in people's childhoods. And if you do something that's not in line with how someone perceives it or how it should be, you know, how they perceive it should be, you're going to have a lot of backlash. And Jay, you brought up a great point. Maybe the best way to go about that is to sort of just break away from all that. You know, Star Wars is a cool concept. The lightsabers, the Jedi, the Sith, it's like it's politics, it's religion, all kind of wrapped into this thing. You can make an interesting, cool, original storyline that doesn't have to center around these legacy characters and create all that possible backlash and rift. You know, great point, Jay. Great point. What do you think, Mr. Freshly Squeezed?
Y'all are, as Padme would say, you're hurting my heart. right? Because it's because Disney has, Star Wars has done this before with the EU. The EU spanned thousands and thousands and thousands of generations. I mean, my favorite era of Star Wars was the Knights of the Old Republic era. The Old Republic era was like the best.
Yes.
And there's so many different stories that play out there with the Mandalorians and the Jedi and the kind of the Sith at that time period and stuff like that before the Great Purge and stuff. It's great stuff. And as a big Star Wars fan, I could pull a billion different storylines. My issue with how Lucasfilm is run right now is, I think it's two things. One, I don't think they have, in my experience, I think they just don't have people at the top that are knowledgeable of the universe like we are and understand where they can pull some of this reference material from and what directions they could go. And also, too, I think, I mean, there's a lot of mismanagement with that kind of stuff as well. How many different series and different movies have we heard about? We're just like, we're still waiting on those. like where are those going to be? And they fall off or something happens, production dramas and whatever. At the same time, I think the storytellers themselves, I mean, I don't know. I don't sense the ambition there. I don't sense the kind of desire to go in those different places like you would think, because I think there is a lot of rich heritage and rich history that you can kind of pull from and kind of redo with this new timeline that they've constructed for themselves. But I just don't see a lot of that ambition. I don't see a lot of knowledge about that kind of stuff. I always bring this up. You ask Kathleen Kennedy a question about any of this stuff, she gives you a very generic answer. You ask Kevin Feige about this stuff, he will give you all these different how the questions interrelated with this story, with that story, and how we want to go here, and that's a great comic book and all that kind of stuff. He has very intimate knowledge of those things. Right. Do you think, Jay, I'm going to ask you because you are the story guy,
Yeah.
Do you think, Lucasfilm has those people, I mean, that can do that properly, that can carry that?
That's a really
kind of
good question. Well, here's the thing. You brought up Kathleen Kennedy, and actually, I think one of the best people to compare Chapek to is Kathleen Kennedy. And this is why I say that. Kathleen Kennedy takes a lot of heat. I dare anybody to go look at Kathleen Kennedy's resume and not tell me it's one of the best resumes in Hollywood. Her resume is outstanding. So what's the problem there? She doesn't have a Kevin Feige. You said it, Dre. She doesn't have a Kevin Feige. So that's Kathleen Kennedy was never supposed to be Kevin Feige. Kathleen Kennedy's the resource person. She's the money person. She's the one saying, like, let's greenlight this, let's greenlight that. Right. Let's get this person involved. But what she does need is she needs a Kevin Feige. She needs somebody to oversee this whole world that
creative visionary, you mean?
Exactly. A creative visionary that understands I'm with you because Knights of the Old Republic, KOTOR 2, fantastic stuff, man. I love it. And so I think what we're missing is, now Lucasfilm does have a story group, but you'll notice that the way that the Lucasfilm story group is run is that they're active in areas where it's probably detrimental for storytellers to be active. And I think they've pulled off that a little bit, but a lot of their storytellers were on Twitter and engaging with fans and offering their opinion on what the latest thing was and why that thing was there and all this kind of stuff. And I think that that's kind of the wrong way to address that. I think you've got to have somebody like a Kevin Feige who's like, look, we're going to hit some rocky areas, but this is the path we're going down. And we're not going to worry about what Twitter says there's going to be some misses. There's going to be some hits. As long as there's more hits than misses, we keep getting to tell stories. Right. And I think that's kind of where Lucasfilm needs to go, because they seem like even take the sequel trilogy. J.J. Abrams comes in, this is what Star Wars is. Rian Johnson comes in, no, Star Wars is this thing. I can make an argument that both those films on their own are very good films. Yeah. You put them in the context of a trilogy, they make zero sense together, right? Yeah. So then you bring J.J. Abrams back in, and J.J. Abrams goes, well, you left me with this, Rian Johnson. I wasn't expecting to come back into this world. Now, what do I have the ability to actually pull off? I have no villain. So I either make Kylo go full full dark side, full Vader, full Emperor, or I try and redeem Kylo. But if I redeem Kylo, I got to bring somebody else. I need another villain. I got to get somebody back as a villain. I can't use Snoke's off the table, and there's no way I can use the leader of the First Order. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. The red-haired guy,
General Hux.
General Hux. You're not getting away with Hux, right? Like he's not going to be the mastermind of everything. And so what does he do? What do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll bring back the Emperor. I mean, this is the fact that nobody's looking at this story holistically and going, where are we going with this? Where's the end of this road? Where are we trying to get to?
And I agree with you because I talk about this all the time. Like, Marvel, they have a direction. They know where they're going. They know where they're going for the next 40 years. It seems like Lucasfilm is really tied up in if with the trilogy, they didn't quite know where they were going to go or how to get there. And they kind of found along the way. And that's where you get this kind of it's all over the place, right? But with the overall Star Wars, I just think it's like a lot of plot filling, and I think the story group does this a lot too, where it's like, oh, let's create a reason why this exists and why this doesn't exist and what happened here and all that kind of stuff. And it's not really like there's not direction. We're not going on a linear timeline, obviously, but it's like where are we going from here? Where is Lucasfilm attempting to be in 5 to 10 years? I have no idea. Marvel, I have a very good idea of kind of where that whole thing is going. Right. For Lucasfilm, I mean, it's clueless, and it has been clueless ever since they were purchased. I mean, let's be honest. It's a lot of story gap things where it's like, hey, let's tell this gap between this timeline. Even with Obi-Wan, right? It tells the story of Obi-Wan between here and here. It's like, well, that's great. Marvel does that kind of stuff too, but that's not the kind of the focus of their whole business. Their whole business is we're moving forward, moving down the line here, and there's momentum towards that direction. I just don't see that that same thing at Lucasfilm, and it frustrates me because Star Wars has an untapped well of potential. It's just sitting there, but they just don't want to tap it.
Well, and just really quick, just 2 things really quick. One, if Lucasfilm wants to hire me to be part of their story group, I'm in. Give me a seat, I'm down. But here's what I think, and this is not a criticism of the individuals in the story group, by the way. Right. This is a criticism of the overarching structure of how it's managed.
100%.
They almost seem to function as librarians as opposed to visionaries of where we're going. Great. And so a librarian says, this is what's come before. And then to your point, Dre, this is where you can slot things in because we kind of could use an explanation for this, create a show. We could kind of use an explanation for this, create a movie. And I think what Kevin Feige is he's not the librarian. He's the visionary. He's the Steve Jobs of that world, right? Yeah. And I think that if we got somebody like, and then by the way, they've got that person. They just need to formalize it because Jon Favreau is amazing at this, and with Dave Filoni at his side, we got perfection there. So let's do that.
Yeah.
So anyways,
the fact that they haven't done that before is it's ridiculous. But go ahead, OG. Sorry.
It's crazy. No, and Jay, you bring up a fantastic point when you compared Feige to Steve Jobs, and a lot of that comes in with the fact of being a visionary and taking risks, right? And being able to hey, you know what? Creatively, this works best. It's a ballsy move, but we're gonna do it because that's what works for the story. It's the sequel trilogy is a perfect example of Lucasfilm really playing it safe. They ended that whole trilogy very, very safe. I was telling Dre, I think it was just yesterday, right, Dre? Mm-hmm. Rey as a character would be so much more interesting. I mean, look, she's the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. Let her go full dark side. You saw her kind of struggling with it through the trilogy. Let her end the trilogy full badass Empress Palpatine, full dark side Sith, and then you can redeem Ben Solo, right? And then you can have him kind of. So they both kind of went kind of opposite poetry. It rhymes, the whole thing. It would have been a much more interesting character, I think, for her arc, who started off very good, ended very bad. Kylo started off very bad, ended very good. I think that makes for a really cool, interesting storyline. But instead, they went the very safe route. We're going to go Rey Skywalker. We're going to do, and just and that's okay. But it felt very reactionary. It felt very safe. I think that Kevin Feige would have taken it in a whole new direction. We're seeing him doing that kind of with Scarlet Witch, taking her in a crazy direction. Fans love Wanda Maximoff, right? And he's not afraid, though, to take that character in really new, interesting directions. And I just wish Lucasfilm would kind of take that same kind of ballsy approach, and they just don't. They play it safe so much. It's sad.
Part of the reason why I think that is because I just don't think the people at the top, is what I said before, they just don't have a good grasp of Star Wars. At least the decision makers don't, right? That's why I agree with you. Set John Favreau and Dave Filoni up as the decision makers, you're going to get a lot of good content real fast, right? But because you don't have that grasp, though, that hinders your ability to take risks. It hinders your ability to feel like, okay, hey, we're going to zig and zag here, but we know kind of where we're going, kind of thing. Kevin Feige can do that because Scarlet Witch, he has a very good knowledge of this current iteration of Scarlet Witch. He knows what fans kind of want to see, and also kind of like where that character has gone in the comic books, right? To understand, like, hey, this story has worked. Let's go ahead and set it up here with this character, but understanding like where our audience kind of wants this character to be, what they're expecting, and maybe what they're not expecting, but what they will to accept, right? Star Wars, I just don't see that operation fleshed out. I just don't see the pieces in place to do that, and that is really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We all love this franchise dearly, and I think that eventually it'll get on its feet. Hopefully Kenobi kind of starts that whole process. Cautiously optimistic. We'll see. We'll see. I'm very much the eternal optimist. I do like to go into these things, with an optimistic point of view and give it a chance. I love Deborah Chow, but there are things that concern me about this show, and we'll kind of see how that all pans out when it premieres.